Here I've completed step one. This is a red wool sweater, Eddie Bauer, 100% wool, that I have washed and dried maybe a couple of times. I also have here in this Christmas sweater stash this that started out as a long coat of my daughter's. Again, it's wool. And this one, which was in my wardrobe, it's got some pulls on it. It's a Chico's, and it is made of... So anyway, it's a more delicate. I think it's probably acrylic, but I just like the way these go together for a Christmas top. My inspiration is this really cool sweater that a gal that I know at our church was wearing one day, and it just really caught my eye. Here's the front, here's the back, and I knocked her tapped her on the shoulder and said, "Could I take a picture of your really cool sweater, and where did you get it?" She said she purchased it at a boutique. And I'd love to know how much she paid for it. I haven't asked her that yet, but at any rate, that's my inspiration. Here's my goodies. And I also took a dive into my button box and found these great green buttons. So we'll see where we go. But I'm doing this on Thanksgiving morning, hoping to take it down to the local boutique, maybe tomorrow or Saturday. So I'm gonna keep telling myself, simple, simple. I've cut it apart. But first I saw a little moth hole, so I'm going to make sure that I don't skip that and put that in any important place. I simply cut out the sleeves, and while I was cutting out the sleeves, then I went to open the sleeves. I started cutting right on the seam line, but as I was cutting, I realized that there's this wonderful bump in here of the sleeve underarm seam. So then I came out leaving a seam allowance that I could use to attach it with. Therefore, when I cut out the second sleeve and cut it open, I have left a seam allowance, as you can see here, all the way up and down. And if I go ahead and cut the seam allowance off, I'll leave a seam allowance on this side as well. But if in doubt, when you're doing upcycle sewing, don't. When I'm doing upcycle sewing, I always keep a little basket here to the side into which I put important little things, and important little things include the care label. So that's going in there. I do try to keep the back label in place until I might figure out that that's not where I want it, but that's also something that I would keep. I have also observed as I'm cutting these apart that here's the outside of the sleeve, here's the inside of the sweater. I can see that this is a little bit lighter tone than this. That would be a pretty discerning eye to tell the difference, but the inside has likely gotten less wear and abrasion, so I think I'm going to endeavor to use this as the outside when I incorporate it into whatever it is I'm going to make. I'm continuing in the cutting apart and design process. On this lighter weight, kind of floppy sweater, I noticed that they have made use of both sides of the knit fabric. Do you see here the courses, the ribs go up and down, and here they go across. If I flip this front over, do you see they go up and down in the same manner as here? So they've not only used right and wrong, quote unquote, sides of the sweater, they've run them in different directions on different portions of the sweater. But what especially draws my attention is this ribbing. This is very soft, and I could even double it, turning under a raw edge to create the soft fabric ties here at the back. So that's likely how I'm going to make use of this area of the sweater. That being decided, and note that I've got 3 different fabrics here. I always like to work with an odd number of fabrics, not just 2. It's a design thing that you work with odd numbers. On this heavy, very felted, again, wool, I realized that it had this wonderful collar. So I have cut off the collar, and it has a nice finish on it. Again, note that I cut it off, leaving a little bit of extra with which to sew it on. Now this could become, in and of itself, a portion of the garment. It could be like this here. It could even be this. I'm not sure. It could be part of a sleeve. But I have cut it off and I have laid it aside. Also, it had some buttons. There were a total of 5 of these nice green buttons, which will look very nice if I decide to use them as a focal point, even here against the red. All of that being said, now I just need to start cutting the green sweater apart and the red sweater apart into the biggest pieces that I can figure that I can get. I've started to cut apart this red sweater. I made a cut in at the shoulder and then stopped, wondering if I wanted to make use of this neckline. So I brought it over here and put it on my mannequin. Well, the circumference of this is certainly not the circumference of an adult head. So my best guess here is that this would be too small, left as it is, to create the neckline of the sweater. Right here there is a seam, so I think I'm still going to cut it off, leaving a seam allowance, and we'll see where that gets us. The ribbing is cut off, so I'm going to put that in a safe place, and I just cut it open at the front V. Now as I cut up the side seam, again, I cut it leaving a seam allowance, because remember, this can be a finish. This has potential. And when I take it and hold it up to my mannequin, I can see that I've got some nice length here. Instead of going ahead and cutting it at this seam as well, I'm going to leave it in this one big piece for the time being. If in doubt, don't. The other thing that crosses my mind as I pile up these two sleeves and the front and that ribbing is, do you see this very distinct crease here? Before I would decide to make use of this opened up on the sweater as is, I would go and steam this to make sure that that crease would come out if in fact I don't want it where it might land up. I'm now going to set that aside and start some more cutting on the heavy felted green. I have just put this green sweater, which did start out very long in a maternity coat of my daughter's. All right, cut off the neckline, and remember that's what looked like this. And I can see that I've got a nice big neck. I might want to retain that curve. Therefore, one of the next things I might do is go and stay stitch it about 1/2 inch all the way around this neckline, just to stabilize that for the time being. The other things that I'm seeing is that, do you see how the fabric has attracted these pills? Now again, this is wool. Wool microscopically is a bunch of fish scales, and what has happened is this got thrown in the washer and the dryer several times, is that those fish scales just kind of locked on each other, and that's what made it shrink, which is what we call felted, but you can still see the wonderful cable quality of it. I believe there's a pocket in here. Yep, a pocket from the side seam. I might still make use of that. That could be nice to have on a sweater. Would it be big enough for a cell phone? A small one like this old lady has. I've got fairly short sleeves, and I also noticed that I have a hole. You have to look carefully at your garment, which is becoming fabric, if you're using something that's not new, as I'm doing in my upcycling. So I'm going to put a safety pin there to mark that spot. I also note that I've got this wonderful cable. That would be a great piece of fabric. Look here, we've got a cable and 1, 2, 3, 4 smaller cables, but 3 of those cables are shoulder to hemline. Well, you can see the kind of changed grain here, and that gives it an angled look. So that's speaking to me and telling me that this piece might be very interesting to make use of. Also over here on this side. So the ideas are cooking. And before I go to cut those sleeves out, again, I'm looking on the inside and I see this nice bump. That's the seam allowances. So when I cut the sleeve out, I'm going to cut on this side, allowing for a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'm noting as I cut this apart, I am not going to make use of these pockets. Do you see how ripply they are? And I don't think that will ever straighten out. Plus, it's so bulky that here in West Tennessee, looking at what I have available, I have this other front piece. I could make use of this predominant cable. I have enough width there. I came up with 21.5 inches, and you can see that that'll fit across the back. But instead, I have decided to make use of this area. leaving this cable for a more predominant place somewhere on the garment. I've also got the idea that this little ribbing, which is the lower finish, might be really cool sticking out over where the sleeve joins the garment. So I'm going to allow for that. I'm going to have to decide here pretty quick if I'm just going to cut that off. And I have enough width if I do that, and I have some of that in another place. So I'm just going to have to decide. So yes, and it's kind of cut off up here to begin with anyway. So I'm going to cut this piece off and then cut my back yoke out of this portion. See, here's that front pocket that I decided I couldn't do anything with. And I can always steam and block this straight. I suspicion that this might be purchased for someone who lives up north as a gift. But where it's really bulky, the pockets, and also here the center front where there's another totally different piece of sweatering attached here to create the facing actually for the front. I might see if I can get those apart. On one side it has actual buttonholes in it. Yes, right here. Now I might make use of that part of the strip if I can get the back off as accent where I could put 3 of those buttons. That could be a potential use. But beware of a lot of bulk. So my next thing is going to be to see if I can get this piece separated from the outside. Finishing the thought I had as I observed all this little lint, I'm telling myself I had thrown this and a lot of those sweaters into the washer and dryer just to freshen them up. These have been stored in bins out in my garage until I had time to play with them. So I always work on as clean, deodorized, without using smelly softener or detergent or anything, fabric as possible. So I'm working with clean fabric, and because they were all washed and dried together, no special care, that's why it's got some light stuff on it. So I'm not going to worry about that. I was able with my scissors to cut this away, but now do you see I'm running here into the buttonholes, so I don't know if that's going to end up as anything or not. Maybe this could be cut straight across and be a portion of the sleeve. That's a thought. And then the buttons could be sewn on accent again. Here then on the studio floor, you can see the pieces I have, starting at the top, the collar, the sleeves, and then the body. What's talking to me right now is this piece in the center back. That's the longest, and as I take that and hold it up onto my mannequin, I can see, look what happens here at the bottom. Isn't that cool the way it kind of goes out like so? Instead of straight, it has a little bit of give, a little bit of swing because of the shape of this piece here. Do I want that in back? If I put that in the back, then I certainly would not likely be doing this trim in the back. I could see that rather at the center front, which leads me then to the point where I'm going to have to decide, do I want this to be a symmetrical, a balanced garment, or do I want it to be more asymmetrical like this? So do you see this part that I have at the center could be placed over here at the side? I'm just not sure. But again, now look, we've got this safety pin here, so that's telling me there's a hole there. If I made this the center front, even if I pulled this up higher to get past that hole, it would be a nice kind of shorter, cropped, wide length, which is so in fashion these days. So I probably will go with that. But a girl can always change her mind, and I am going from that inspiration, and I think what I'm going to do is move this over to the left side here and still allow for that swing and work some of the other red and green over on the other side. I'm an asymmetrical loving person, so that's just the way I'm going to go. So I have made that decision. Then the question becomes, where do I cut? In here. Do I want to cut on this side of the cable or this side of that cable? In doubt, always cut it bigger. So I'm going to cut on this side of the cable, again leaving a seam allowance. Designing is letting the fabric talk to you. And you must have a mannequin. So this is a mannequin that I can stick pins into It's a size 12 or so, which is a good size, and if I allow for more room than that, then that can accommodate most people these days. But look how beautifully it can come around the side, and I could then cut maybe down this cable, leaving a seam allowance, and then that would make up part of the back. The other thing I'm thinking at this point is to take and add one of those sleeves of the red across the top as a yoke. Oh, this is getting fun. And yes, indeed, if I take this bottom edge of the garment, let it be the bottom of my top, it can span all the way around, meeting the back here on the other side. Yes. So now I just need to decide how long I want it, or how deep. I always think in thirds, so I'm going to have, and I know the garment wasn't in thirds, but it's just my inspiration. And yes, there are 1, 2, 3 parts, so perhaps I could do that. I want to keep it weighted with the dark color, and I want to bring light colors up to the top. And remember, we have this, and we have this. I have measured, marked, and cut that lower piece. And in this case, I was able to make use of the rotary cutter because it was lying flat. One thing I'm always cognizant of as I design and teach design is to never make a garment that is half as tall as the person wearing it from the shoulder line to the floor. I actually took the yardstick that you see there on the cutting table, and I measured the distance from the shoulders down to the floor, which was about 58 inches tall. And I measured up, so that red tape there is denoting half. So I'm got the bottom of this garment well above half. But I think for current styling, I'm going to make it a little bit shorter. So I think I'm going to take it up about 3 inches, even as I design here, because as I decrease this upper portion, it gives me less area on which to design. So I'm really establishing now the finished length of my garment. All right, again, a girl can change her mind. This sweater has been in my wardrobe for quite a while, and I had it on the other day, and I took it off, and I thought, you know, I really like that neckline. It's so face framing and flattering. So, my favorite word, so. As I was looking at this red garment, and I measured the circumference of this at the lower edge is 40 inches. And indeed, when I look at the bottom of this sweater, do you see I could cut it and it could become a collar just like this on this garment. And how much length do I have? 40 inches. So neckline decided. And furthermore, and I know I had initially thought that that green piece would be the collar, but I like the idea of the red around the neckline. I think more flattering for the face and color up near the person. And then if I make it not just continuous like this, but split it, and that would give me a place for either 1 button or 3 at a line, because this is gonna likely be turned back. So right at this visual line will be where this splits. And that, dear friends, is the end of my first session of fun. This was Thanksgiving morning, and now I need to go do a little cooking. While I'm cooking some things to take to a friend, I need to keep this picture of the 3 parts in mind. Right, kitty? Another session. At this point, I've determined that in order to start cutting the light green, I really need to come up with my pattern. So digging into my pattern stash, I found this one. And what I'm looking at is just this kind of cropped, a little bit off the shoulder PJ top. So I pulled out the tissue. Now I'm going to go press this flat and trim along the largest size there, and then I can get going. First of all, let me apologize for the hum in the background. That's my heater, and even here in West Tennessee, it's a frosty morning. I've marked with red the seam line on my pattern, and I've keyed it together here on the underarm and at the hemline. And I have laid the front tissue onto that big left front, and I'm saying left and right as I'm looking at it. It's obviously actually the garment's right side, but I'm gonna say left and right as I'm looking at it. You can see then the information that I've gleaned is that I can cut in here, but it's very clear that I'm gonna have to have a yoke in order to get everything up to the shoulder where it belongs. That then is what I have to determine next, the yoke. I have pretty well determined that the side over here, the right front, is gonna be the light green. So now I have to just make some more decisions about colors and where they go. I am taking into account, though, that this red is going to be my collar. So I'm thinking I will probably go ahead and make the yoke out of the heavier green, because it's really lightweight green. I don't think is going to be enough to actually support the weight of the heavy felted fabric in the collar. Here I have drawn the straight line, which is parallel to the center front of where this left front is going to join the lighter green that comes over here. And I'm thinking I might use a double layer. Anyway, you can see here this and this, that's what I'm going to have to cut out of the yoke. Now, as I'm planning, I have drawn in red, and that indicates a seam line. So you can see here, as I've placed this right against the cable of the green underneath, I've allowed for a seam allowance. And when I cut this part, I know I'll need to allow for a seam allowance this side of the seam line. Again, I've keyed this together under the arms, and I've got these level. So now what I need to do is just cut out this armhole and straight across, and I'll make a note that the line that I've got folded here is my cutting line. So the seam line will be 5/8 of an inch down from that. You just have to do one step at a time. You can't plan it all out. That's my biggest message with upcycle sewing. You just have to do the next step. Looking at what I have available, I have this other front piece. I could make use of this predominant cable. I have enough width there. I came up with 21.5 inches, and you can see that that'll fit across the back. But instead, I have decided to make use of this area, leaving this cable for a more predominant place somewhere on the garment. I've also got the idea that this little ribbing, which is the lower finish, might be really cool sticking out over where the sleeve joins the garment. So I'm going to allow for that. I'm going to have to decide here pretty quick if I'm just going to cut that off. And I have enough width if I do that, and I have some of that in another place. So I'm just going to have to decide. So yes, and it's kind of cut off up here to begin with anyway. So I'm going to cut this piece off and then cut my back yoke out of this portion. See, here's that front pocket that I decided I couldn't do anything with. And I can always steam and block this straight. Here you can see I have the yoke, and let's see what that'll look like across the back. Here's my person, is the back yoke, and then the collar will come down over that. All right, I need to find this yoke. I know that this 2/3 of the front is going to be light green. I'll likely bring that to the back as well. And then looking at what I have left of the green, it appears I have this little hunk that I can get that left yoke out of. And then I need to think ahead, and if I have the top of the sleeves each be out of the heavy green, I think this is kind of cool. There would be cables going across on one sleeve and up and down on the other. Here's that little ribbing that I had cut off and put in my important little stuff basket, and so that's enough. It could go part way. So do you see that I have enough here to get the top of each sleeve? The other thing that I have determined here. Well, no, I have this piece is extra. Up here, I've got the two sleeves, which I could work together. I could seam them here, and that would be the very top of the sleeve. You can look at this one, that what I might well do is start about here and kind of make a curve down and then back up, so the top of the sleeve will have a curve to it. I'm not sure, that might be asking too much. Looking at our inspiration photo, you can see how these sleeves are of a lighter weight fabric because it's kind of blousing down over, and that will be perfect for this green. I'm about to the point where I'm going to have to start sewing, but at least I have figured out what goes where.